Hello everybody, welcome to our virtual 67 Pall Mall. Finally for today, we'll be joined by Alicia Riccieri and Giulio Caramazzi, who will be discussing their wines from Gaglioli in Chianti. But for now, we're very pleased to welcome back Sarah Jane Evans, MW, who will be discussing Rioja and tasting a few wines with us from there. So please do chat away at the side, show us what you're drinking, where you're drinking it from, and put your photos on social media with hashtag 67 from home. As usual, we'll have 15 minutes at the end to ask any questions, and a big welcome to Sarah Jane.
Oh, well, brilliant to be here. It's been a slightly frantic day, I must say, Ronan, because my elder daughter gave birth to her second child.
And congratulations.
She rang this morning and I was like, oh, this baby isn't supposed to arrive till tomorrow and I've got this webinar happening. And then fortunately, the baby was born at lunchtime. So I've just been over being a bit grandmotherly, but I haven't met the baby yet. So after we've had the webinar, well, I'll go and see the baby. But this is such a great moment to taste these amazing wines and toast a new person in the world.
Absolutely.
So,
well, congratulations. That's great. Yeah.
Good. All right. Well, I could set straight on with some screen sharing, I think. Let's see how we go. Oh, no, that one is the one I think we want. There we go. Yeah, and we can get on to a full slideshow and we know what's happening. There we go. Come on, start from the beginning. Oh, there we are. Play from the start. Great. Here we go. So, well, first of all, it's just lovely to be here, and I really felt that for this, maybe for me, the last tasting of the summer before summer starts properly, we wanted to give ourselves a treat, and I thought, what better treat to do than to have 2010 Rioja. Here we are. It's a decade on, and I have this very strong feeling that Bordeaux is always talking about, well, we'll talk about 2010 Bordeaux, but frankly, we should be talking about 2010 Rioja in the same way. It was a really special year. And there's another reason for talking about it too, because there are a number of styles in Rioja. You will each have your own favorites. And I shall be interested to hear from you if we can get some going in the chat of what those favorites are. But so it's been quite hard to pick on a year that was really sensational across the region to work out what to pick. And also what I wanted to do was to talk about a range of different features that you might need to consider. So normally I think I'd be putting on my academic Master of Wine hat, but maybe because I'm a little bit more joyful today with the arrival of a new member in the family, I'm more relaxed. But instead of giving you everything technical, what I really want to do is to allow you to appreciate the wines, but to think about, this is the one technical slide, to think about some particular features that these wines might have in common or might have different, and where your opinion lies and where you think, well, apart from opinion, where top quality lies. And in fact, if I can remember to do it, I will be giving you a poll at the end of the session to see what were your favorites. You're only allowed to have one vote, so it's going to be quite hard, I think, to decide. So what we have here across, and really, I think we're talking about the 5 red wines. I'll talk about the white wines separately. So thinking about the 5 red wines as you taste them with me, or if you haven't got them in front of you, it's still an exercise which I think really unites my thoughts and questions that I always ask myself when I'm writing about Rioja and the finest wines of the region. So we're all talking about single vineyard wines now. It's become trendy across the world. Everybody has single vineyard wines. We know that, as I've put here, the regulations have changed in Rioja so that there is now a category which you can put on the label called Viñedo Singular. Now there's criticisms about what we think about that category or how it's defined, but it's a movement in a sort of slightly Burgundian direction. It's just not something that Rioja's done before. They've strangely in a way, but in the past they've always been about Rioja, the brand, the whole region, rather than looking at the differences. So we've got a single vineyard. We've actually got a couple of single vineyard wines here, but we've also got multiple vineyards. Is multiple better than single vineyard? Well, we'll see. Then varieties. We have, I think, one single variety red here, but we've also got blends. Rioja has been always about blends, as you might say, Bordeaux is about blends. So do we, you know, which do we prefer? And if you're going to have a blend, which are you going to blend? So we have here Tempranillo with 3 of them with Graciano and 1 of them with Mazuelo. So that's a little thing to think about when you're contrasting the wines. Then there's winemaking. So, well, obviously you can ferment the wine in small stainless steel, vast wooden vats of the historic kind that you'll see when you go and visit Lopez de Heredia. Or the key, though, is what you age it in. So the regulation, which is why I've put it down here, because this is a bit of regulation which is really contentious. The regulation says that you should be using a 225-litre barrel, which at the time, you know, as with all regulations, they're a good thing. So at the time of the regulation, you have, you know, it's to make sure that everybody does the right thing. It's a sensible means of control. Now, in fact, it's a straitjacket. So we're going to find winemakers here who've chosen to do their own thing. And indeed, if you're in Rioja, then you should, you know, you could be making a wine, aging it in amphoras. Concrete certainly is, you know, very fashionable. Obviously, there are some eggs around, but you don't have to use 225 litres. You can do 500 litres. You can go for 300, whatever you like. But the regulation at the moment means that if you want to make a Reserva or Grand Reserva, you have to make it for the classification in that size barrel. It's a piece of small print, which actually is quite important. Now, at this point, I've talked halfway through this page, and I actually think that we need to start with the first wine. So if you have it in front of you, it's the 2010 Lopez Heredia Viña Gravonia Blanco. So I won't say anything about it now. I just want you to enjoy it, and then we can discover it on the next slide. And sadly, because I'm driving back to see my new granddaughter after this session, I'm being good and spitting, but these are not wines to spit. I would say, actually, I hope you've poured them all out if you had them, and that you don't enjoy the whole glass in one go. Go back to them, because I think they open up very much in the glass and there's lots to find. So continuing with these things to think about is, we've looked at origins, we're going to look at varieties, we're going to think about winemaking, we're going to think about aging and that size of container. Now, one thing, here we are, we talk about, you know, part of this tasting is about Rioja Grand Reserva. Well, Grand Reserva, people will say that's just American oak, isn't it? Well, I think you know well enough that it's not just American oak, but there are still too many people who look down on Great Rioja for that reason, because it doesn't have French oak. So we have a mix of oaks coming up in this tasting, and again, it will be fascinating to learn what you think about them. And then, of course, there's different duration of aging, because if you're making a wine that's not Grand Reserva, then you don't.
Hello everyone, I'm very sorry, we are experiencing some kind of problems with Wi-Fi, so let's keep waiting a bit more for Sarah. She's fantastic and her presentation is amazing too, so I'm very sorry. Let me just some minutes to try to get her again, okay?
Well, this is I think we all need a drink after this. I'm very excited that there are even people still here.
They're waiting for you.
Okay, right. Okay, shall I go? Now, it's quite possible we're going to break down again, in which case you know, for heaven's sake, enjoy the wines. We can always come back to this, but I will go back to try and get back to my PowerPoint. Okay, here we go. Now, well, this is where I'm going to have to take this smartly in case I just disappear, but certainly if necessary, we can rebook this for another time. So we've got ourselves to Vigna Gravonia. And the point I was about to say about this is, if you want to taste a 2010 from Lopez de Heredia, you're not going to get one. You're either going to get one, a Reserva, a red Reserva, which is younger, I think they're now to 2007, or you go right back to one of those glorious, the glorious old white wines. So, but I think that Gravonia is an extraordinary compromise. So you can see here, it's aged in slightly small, it's fermented in slightly smaller vats, but look at the age on it, 4 years in barrel, and then it's aged in bottle. You know, I think nowadays, some people are frightened of bottle age, but look, this is, you know, and now if you read their notes, it's ready to go for another 10 years. And that lovely alcohol, I've put the acidity in here. It's a bit of a technical note, but simply because it shows you it's got that super freshness. So that's what's going to keep it going. When we come back here again in 10 years' time, we're going to have that lovely penetrating freshness. And then around it, these flavors of maturity. You know, if somebody's expecting to get something that tastes like a regular white wine, that's not the case. This is a wine, that the type of wine that can turn up in a master wine exam, or I'm sure a master sommelier exam, because you know exactly what it is. It can't be anything else. If you don't know what it is, then I think it's confusing. And obviously it's a great food wine. So that's our first wine. Now let's move on to the second one. So although I've got Grand Reservas in this lineup, I really wanted to have Vigna El Pison, which is a really exceptional wine. Now what's quite interesting about this, of course, is that this producer, and this is another thing to do with regulations, chose to leave the Rioja denomination. So the wines are from Álava, as it were, or from their particular region, but they're not now Rioja. But obviously, this is a bottle, the label that was, since that happened at the end of 2015, this is a previous bottle. So this is a winemaker who's saying, look, I want to do my own thing in this particular vineyard. And what at Artadi they've been so good at is really identifying the right spaces. So it's a particular kind of vineyard. And then how do they make it? Well, in a way, it's perhaps more French style, open top wooden vats, and then a relatively quick fermentation, gentle. I like this. The language tells me it's small pumping over. It's gentle pumping over. They're not trying to force too much out of this wine. And then it has just 15 months in new French oak. So here we are, compared with some of the wines that come in, you've got new French oak and you've got only 15 months. But then if you look at it, it was bottled in 2012. So it's got nearly 8 years in bottle, just settling into itself. Yeah, the color is quite inky and deep. Tempranillo, I've said this often to people who are learning about Spanish wines, or indeed about wines. It's, for me, was very often the hardest grape variety to identify. I could get Cabernet Sauvignon, Shiraz, Merlot, you know, you name them. And then eventually, when I ruled out Garnacha and the others, then I got to Tempranillo. For some reason or other, I had a kind of blindness about it, but this is a really, you know, if you want to have an exceptional wine, then this is from a very special place in a very special part of Rioja, at really made by a special person, just as it should be. Gosh, it's got that terrific blend of very indulgent, velvety character. It's just super enjoyable to drink. And then coming behind it, you've got herbs, you've got licorice, I can feel my voice filling out with that sumptuous substance. And what's so great is obviously this does sit at the top of the Altadi ladder, but I'm sure you've tasted the others. I mean, these are wines all the way through, going down the pyramid, that really value time spent. So this is 14.5%, and perhaps it's something you would note about the wine. You know, possibly then I'd want to serve it ever so slightly cooler. Obviously, being our first red and being Tempranillo, the acidity is lower. But anyway, Altadi say in their notes that they reckon this is wine that could last for 20 years. And it'd be interesting to know what you think about it. Now, in fact, with this screen sharing, I can't see your chat. So I hope you've got some comments to say about it, which we can share afterwards. So that's our first red, single variety, single vineyard, made not in the Grand Reserva method. Now,
Sarah, just to let you know, if you go right up to the top under, and you can, there's a drop down that will come down, it will say chat.
Oh, of course.
If you click on that, it will show the
it'll say, it's a drop down that says, let's have a look, chat. I've got one chat. This is not very good. Yeah, but thank you, Paul. Paul is saying the wines are profiting from time in the glass. Now, you might actually say that maybe I designed that Wi-Fi crash just so that this could happen, but you're absolutely right. So what I really want to hear from all of you, because I think, Paul, you've made a comment to the panelists. I'd like everyone to hear everyone's comments about their favorite Grand Reservas. I wanted to be a nice dialogue going on. So here we are. Let's go back to Ramirez de Ganuza. Ramirez de Ganuza, in a sense, is it's a wonderfully perfect winery. It's a great visit, a beautiful winery in the middle of a town. I should think it drives everybody mad, like the best historic wineries do when the grapes come in, because it's happening the harvest is happening in the middle of their daily lives. And it's a winery that absolutely shot onto the radar when inevitably, well, not inevitably, but the famous critic gave it the highest scores. And now it's good to come back. I went to see them recently and tasted through all their vintages and to work out where they were coming from, what was so really good about them. I have to say, they've obviously thought about it hard. I'm not a fan of their labels, but if you see the label anywhere, it's true that you'll notice it. That yellow color is so distinctive. So setting that aside, and that's really only a personal comment, now let's think about the wine. So we've got here, I mean, I looked up at my tasting note this afternoon for this wine when I tasted it earlier this year, and I was just, I had all these wonderful positive notes, nothing accurate at all, but it was just about its luscious deliciousness. And so here we are now. We've got a blend, and it looks like the most popular blend in my lineup today is with Graziano, because Graziano it's a lesser variety. As you know, Contino has 100% Graziano, but it's generally a lesser variety. But when you put it in a blend, it's that thing that really helps, sticks with the wine, gives it backbone. If you're going to have a wine for aging, then Graziano is the thing you want to have with you. Maybe Garnacha, not so much. Garnacha is going to give you the current charm, but Graziano is built for the long run. They're lovely vineyards, aged about 60 years. So they have a particularly interesting technique, which they're very well known for. Once they've cooled the grapes down, they have a full bunch. I'm gesturing here, but actually I don't need to gesture. If you think of a big bunch, it's got shoulders, and then going down the middle is the cylinder of the remaining fruit. And what they do is they cut off the shoulders, because they're the best bit, and separate them from the tips. And the shoulders, which are destemmed, are then fermented in these small stainless steel tanks and in French oak. So what's fascinating about that is you think, gosh, this is shockingly wasteful, but actually this is exactly the way you select the very best fruit. And they're known for using the Ombros, and it's something that it really sets them apart. And you must think about whether it sets it apart in the wine as well. And then this one is has a regular aging, but although it's a Grand Reserva, it's actually aged in French oak. So they've made a decision to put it in French oak. They feel it flatters their grapes more. It has a bit of structure. And maybe the outcome of the separating off the shoulders is that it is 15%. I'm lifting my shoulders here. It's just a little bit more in alcohol. Let's see what we think. It has a great aroma. It's one of those ones you don't really need to drink because it's promising so much in terms of the dark fruit and then that French oak character, which is super elegant. Then it just explodes in the mouth. It is something we really need to have a red meat together. We need to be sitting in the St. James's room downstairs having some succulent piece of beef. It's a great wine too, and I think definitely is another one which has which certainly now has so much to offer. So shall I punish it for its 15% ABV? No, of course, of course not. But it is something that you really, it's a wine to reflect on. And I'm very excited to be able to have it here. Very nice contrast with the Artadi. Two ways of making wines from similar regions with a predominance of Tempranillo and very different outcomes. So let's move ourselves on to the next one. Well, super interesting. I'm feeling very warm about Muga at the moment because you know that they, in this generation, it's a collection of brothers and cousins. And what's particularly distinctive about them is they're very tall. They could make lead the Spanish basketball team. And the most senior in job titles on the management side of the brothers and cousins, Manu Muga has just been made a member of the Gran Orden de Caballeros Divino. I'm at the moment chairman of the Gran Orden, and we've done it because for our respect for the fascinating way that and the extraordinary way that since 1920 in the foundation of Muga in the town of Arrow, they have built an internationally respected brand. And what I'm really fascinated by is that they're known for those wonderful reservas and Gran Reservas, and they have a great Gran Reserva, Prado Enea. And so you think, well, okay, stop there. Why, if you're in the station quarter in Arrow, you're the heart of Rioja Alta, why do anything else except Rioja Reservas and Gran Reservas? Well, as one of the cousins explained to me, who's winemaker, what they're trying to do is allow the vineyard to express itself. And within the straitjacket which we have of the regulations, they can't do that. So here's somebody who's stepped back and said, okay, I'm going to do the best that I can with the fruit that I've got, and it's going to be from the Muga family, whose wines are very well known, but something different. So it's got Graciano again. He's chosen to put in quite a bit more to add quite a bit more structure. And it's fermented in these wooden vats, and it's no temperature control. Some people prefer temperature control, others don't. They definitely don't. It's a kind of wild ferment. And with fairly long maceration afterwards. So what he then does is he uses new French oak, and that's something that's very important to him, the origin of that oak. And then 6 months in old vats. Now I asked about the new French oak, and he said people can talk about French oak, but the point is that you have to choose the forest. And if you want to know anything about forestry and barrel making and all of that, a visit to Mugo is a great thing. They, like a few others, they have their own cooperage. They, as it were, cure their own wood, but they'll go and shop for it in France, and they have strong views about where it should come in the USA. So they use both French oak and American oak, and you can talk to them about both. On this occasion, we've got French oak, as we had with the Gran Reserva from Ramirez de Ganuza. Oh, very sumptuous, you know, the color is sumptuous, the aroma is dense. Yeah, that's a meal in itself, and I think that's definitely a wine that, you know, fine, we've had 10 years in the bottle, but really it could do with another 10. I would enjoy it now. I think if you're the kind of person who likes to have a really big wine, then you'll love it now. If you're more of a shrinking violet like I am, then you probably want it, you know, in certainly another 10 years. I had some friends around the weekend, and we had shared with great pleasure between us a bottle of Arrow. But it's something that you drink with pleasure, with debate, with you know, it's not a wine that you can stand by and just drink it for sure. I think it's something really quite special. So now we're getting through. I hope I shan't be overrunning, because you'll all be having to rush out to go to the cinema, I guess, in the wide world. This is our next wine, and I guess very familiar to many of you. Anybody who's been to my tastings knows that I'm a great fan of Rioja Alta, but I do try to be very, very detached about this, so that I'm, you know, I don't go over the top. Now, you know that Rioja Alta has, I was about to say, has 2 Gran Reservas, 904 and 890, but in fact, it's now added another Gran Reserva to the category, the Arana, but which always was a Gran Reserva, then just never called it that. But what's interesting is there's a particularly lovely wine, which I'm sure is a favorite with many of you, which is Viña Aldantha, which is has been released in 2010 as a Selección Especial, and they've only done it about 3 or 4 times, which is a glorious wine. And then I asked Guillermo Rantabal, who runs the company, the other day, why is it that you don't call it a Gran Reserva, because it clearly is. And then he said, well, we could do, but we just haven't. So there is obviously, you know, that's a wine that follows the regulations. It's made exactly as you should make a Gran Reserva. It's aged in those barrels, but they choose to do it this way or that way. So I could have chosen either 904 or 890, and it's really, if I've given you 8, or you've purchased 904 this time, then please next time give 890 a chance. This is again a blend of Tempranillo and Graciano. So another blended wine, perhaps representing the sort of epitome of what a classical Rioja can be about. But what's interesting in that whole business about classical Rioja, and I think the British are very seen as consumers of classical aged Rioja, is that it's meant to be in a certain kind of attenuated style. And actually now, when you taste do a blind tasting, as I'm just about to do a big one again next week for Decanter magazine, the Gran Reservas are in 2 styles. So there's Gran Reserva, I think, of which this is the classic version. altogether, although brought up to the present day, quite polished, quite modern in its way. And then there are Grand Reservas which just don't taste like they've got the age. You can look on the label and see, yes, it's a Grand Reserva, but actually, when it comes to drinking it, you think this tastes like a Reserva. So when I judge a competition every year where we look for 10 top Grand Reservas, and it gets harder and harder to find something that's really typical. So I think, though, that 904 looks like, doesn't it? It looks like what you imagine a Grand Reserva should look like. It looks like it's had time in oak, and of course time in American oak, because it's just, and it has that tertiary character. Now, I do remember going to it with some people who were new to this classical world of wine, which was being held by Rioja, and you have to convince people that this mushroomy aroma is something that's absolutely glorious. But I think once you learn to love it, it's a bit like not being a coffee drinker and then learning to love coffee, not being a sherry drinker, maybe that's an even harder step. But this maturity it's to me super glorious. Now, I did say to you I was going to spit, but I'm afraid when it comes to 904, I can't. So there's some discussion about when its peak would be. Well, I'd ask you when its peak would be, so we can talk about it when I've just finished these slides. But the peak is now, because it's so delicious now. But indeed, if you want to, you could encourage Ronan to keep some in the cellar for another 10 or 15 years. I remember vividly judging 890, its partner, at Decanter World Wine Awards, where I was in charge of Spain with my colleague at the MW, Pedro Ballesteros, but in fact now I'm one of the co-chairs of the whole thing. But at the time when I was just in charge of Spain, we came to the final and we had to choose between two Riojas for the Rioja Prize. And we had a 2001 Rioja Alta, Gran Reserva, and it would have been, I think it was 890. And we had a 2004 other famous name. They were both blind, but in fact, the night before, although we had already tasted, Pedro and I had tasted, I don't know, 100 wines that day, we just practically finished the sample bottle because it's such a lovely thing. So the next day, with a third judge, who was our independent judge coming to help us find the trophy winner, we had a delightful discussion, which went on the lines of, the independent judge said, well, it's obvious, isn't it? And we said, yes, it's obvious. And this person said, well, it's clearly the 2004. And our faces dropped a mile because it's somebody we really respected, you know, their authority was super important, and somehow or other, we had to convince them. Anyway, in the end, my colleague Pedro, who's a professional diplomat, amongst other things, in his most diplomatic way said, come back in 25 years and I'll show you that this 890 2001 is still absolutely singing alive. So you know, these wines have great longevity. We know that winemaking changed a bit, but I think Rioja Alta has done a huge amount of work on their winemaking. So I think one can be confident about the future. But yeah, I think as Chris Newbury is saying, it could be time to get the 2009 out of 4 storage and start enjoying. Yes, I mean, I'm all for putting wines away, but for heaven's sake, don't put them away too long. So we have had El Pison, we've had the Gran Reserva from Ramirez de Ganuza, who, if you don't know as a winery, I think you really should. We've had the lovely Arrow from Muga and the 904. And if you're interested in the relationship between 890 and 904, because it's fascinating, is I wrote up a tasting at the Decanter held in their wine fair, I think last year, which was a great presentation by Julio Sainz, who's the winemaker, and he explained exactly what the difference was between the two. So please do look online on, it's Decanter Premium, I think. Well, you may be able to find it just on decanter.com, but it's a really terrific explanation. So now we come to our last wine. Let's have a look. And how could I not include the Castillo Iguay? So, of course, you know, we taste this thinking of the other great Iguay wines. I mean, it's a bottle you can see of extreme confidence. It's proud of its message. It's embossed bottom and top, but I think it rightly so. Now, so here we are. We have a blend. And we have a little bit less Tempranillo, and then we have Mazuelo, because as you may remember, the interesting thing about Murrieta, apart from the fact that they feature their Mazuelo, which is otherwise Carignan, Carignana, is that they have a lovely rosé, which is entirely made out of Mazuelo, which is in a sort of perfume bottle. Very original and distinctive thing. And what Carignan gives you, Carignana gives you in Priorat, for instance, is that blueberry fruit and brilliant acidity. So something that could go very well with an aging wine. So here we are, we have this blend. It's from, on their wonderful Iguay estate. It's from a single vineyard planted in 1950. A lot of these, many of these grapes, vines today are more or less the same age. And they have, what they've done with this one is to age it according to the regulation, the 24 months in barrels. But this one is a blend of American and French oak. And its alcohol is, again, a little bit lower than these. Maybe one thing you can notice with some of the more, some of the wines that don't follow the Reserva regulations is they may be a little bit higher in alcohol. Perhaps that's too much of a sweeping statement. Well, that's quite a wine also to finish this part of the tasting, I must say. It's it does come rolling through end with warmth, but it has the freshness I'd expect. Lovely texture. I think it only begins to be ready now. This is definitely something I want to see with another 10, 15 years on for sure. I think we underestimate so many of these wines. And what, obviously, you know that Marcus de Murrieta, since Vicente Cebrián came in to run the show, they've been doing a root and branch change. And the wines really get better and better. So I've reached, at this point, the end of my my presentation. So I'm going to stop the screen sharing. Hopefully I shall come back into something different, or maybe not. Or maybe we'll go back to screen sharing. Well, what I'm most keen to see, first of all, is I've got a poll. I wonder if somebody listening is able to put the poll up on screen, because it's to ask you. Yeah? So is that going to come up in the chat box?
No, it'll come up in the middle of the screen.
All right, okay. So do I need to go back to screen sharing?
No, it's fine, it's fine. Just give it.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. So, so no double voting here. You've got one vote, and I can't vote. They're actually on this showing. I'm not sure which one I vote for. And in the meantime, I'd love to know if there was any Grand Reserve or other wine I should have put on this list. Okay. I've got a question from James I need to answer. I will certainly do that. So the stress the stress, Ronan, is killing me. This result. Quite often I don't like to do a poll like this because it's unfair on the producers, but on this occasion I think they're all such giants that actually, and each one will have their fans and their supporters. And so much depends on today and how you felt about these wines going across the year.
Sarah, would you like to take a look in the results?
I'm sorry?
Would you like to take a look in the results?
Yeah, we see the results. Yes, please.
Yes. Tell me.
There it is.
Well, very interesting. Now, I think that's unfair, probably because I've talked too much about Rioja Alta, but, well, you see, exactly, there's a fine balance between the wines. You know, this is why, you know, for work, I'm just about to start on the 1st of August, co-chairing the Decanter World Wine Awards, and we're going to do them under very socially distant conditions. And we're going to do 16,000, 17,000 wines. So it's wonderful, everybody's coming together. But, you know, although that's a world of scores, there is no one right answer. So anyway, we had a question here from James, which was about, could I talk about the difference between 904 and 890? It was quite interesting to hear Julio talk, and I would really encourage you to read my piece on decanters, so I don't just repeat myself, but he talked about 890 being more explosive, and whereas 904 being more linear. And I don't see Julio as being a tremendously metaphorical man, but actually I think explosive was the word. So, you know the history that 890 is named after 1890, the foundation of the winery. But at the point where it continued to be called 1890 as a style, then by the time they got into other vintages, it obviously was confusing, which is why 890 is what remains. And then 904 then came in separately. It's interesting to mention 890 because they just celebrated, I'm just trying to think, it was last week, maybe last Wednesday, the anniversary of the founding of the winery in 1890. And the King and Queen of Spain came to visit the station quarter and walked around, and it was quite fascinating watching, well, this is just a side point, watching the King of Spain coming to visit, which is a great thing to do to support the opening up of wineries again and tourism in a place where, because the station quarter, Arrow and that region was very severely affected at the beginning of coronavirus. It came apparently from a wedding or a funeral in Vitoria and spread very intensely. But of course, when they go to visit, they're obviously wearing masks and they're all open-necked and very relaxed. And I was just thinking that maybe it wouldn't be quite the same with our royal family. Perhaps I'm wrong. So, interesting question. What Rioja represents best value? Well, I would say I was looking at the prices yesterday of a few of them, and some of them are, I could almost say, shockingly cheap. But if you see them on Ronan's list at 67, then but for heaven's sake, don't go for the Burgundy, don't go for the Bordeaux, don't go for the Napa. Rioja Grand Reserva is going to be the great deal. And what's super interesting is that there is a quantity of really good Grand Reserva, which is or indeed just actually of old Rioja from great vintage like 1970, sitting around in bodegas, but also in some old restaurants as well. So if you search around, particularly in Spain, but there is I think one or two companies who do it in England too, you can get wonderful old Rioja if that's something you like. I've obviously revealed that I do like old Rioja as well as the newer styles. You can get wonderful old Rioja at remarkably cheap prices. So but in terms of value of these, I think that our Tardy, for instance, has, I haven't checked the price on that, but our Tardy has reached a very significant place in terms of reputation and auction, and so they're maybe not everyday drinking price, and but I would say the others, and probably that goes for Murrieta and Ramirez de Ganuza too, but I mean Rioja Alta and Aro are astonishingly good value. Now that still means that you're going to be paying £50 perhaps, but they are compared with the others and other wines that you might buy. If you're going to divide that up between a few friends, then I think it's a brilliant investment. So Alberto's asked, are there any Viñedos Singulares I can recommend at this time? Alberto, in fact, no, I can't, simply because it's relatively new. You know, it's one thing to have a regulation, it's another thing to have the bottles issuing. So they are coming out, but it's been quite irregular. I think we've all focused so much on the regulation that we haven't really had a chance to see. I know some companies have been talking about it, but they're not. You know, this would be the year they're out, but I can't give you a straight answer now. And then Peter has a nice question. Should we know about egg whites? Yes. Well, I suppose it depends whether you're vegan or not. But the great thing about Rioja is it still retains, as well, a number of classical regions retain the practice of using egg whites to take out all the dead yeasts, to clarify the wine, just as you would do with a consommé. I mean, I don't make consommé, and you probably don't do either. But you know, if you were, you would whisk through an egg white, and then it would take with it all the solids, and you'd be left with an absolutely pure substance. So, if you look on the Muga website, they have not only some interesting stuff about oak and barrels and how they treat wood and so on, but they have this delightful machine which splits the yolks from the whites. So you break in the egg at the top, and then the liquid runs down, and on one side you get the egg yolk, on the other side you get the egg white. It's rather, I must say, it's a delightful thing to see. But I think, you know, very firmly, these wineries all hold on to their traditions. You know, Marqués de Murrieta goes back to 1852, and you know, as Riscal goes back a very long way, and they are modern and all cleaned up and internationally marketed wines, but they hold on to some traditions very dear. Now I've got a question about 890 and 904. How does the wine growing making of the Ardantha compare? I should have it next to me. Now, in fact, it was probably in the same feature. I think the thing about the Ardantha, and why, if you can get hold of it, the 2010 Selección Especial is really worth buying, is that, as I said, they only selected in very rare years. So I think the one before that was 2001, and then they go back. There's only been two more before that. And you sometimes think the wineries are doing special selections just because they want to get us to spend our money, but actually they are very scrupulous about not doing it too often. And you know, it's a sign that 2010 was really a vintage that we should all come back to in 10 years time. So I haven't really answered your question, I think, but it's the same scrupulous sourcing. They have a fair amount of data on their vineyards, but Paul, if you want to send me a separate email, I can send you chapter and verse. So does it look like now we have come more or less to the end of our questions? If there's any wine I should have mentioned, or I should have had in this, somebody you feel is a very fine wine that's not here, let me know. Stan, you agree with me? That's good to know. Don't miss out on 2010. It's been great to be with you this evening. I'm super sorry about the introduction, or the disruption to the broadcast, but as was said, the great thing about having that terrible Wi-Fi failure was it meant that the wines had a chance to open in the glass. So thank you so much for your attention, and I look forward to being with you again sometime in the future.
Thank you very much, Sarah. When are you doing something for us again? Do you know?
Well, I haven't got anything organised, so we need to sit and talk about what you need.
All right. Well, have a think.
Yep.
Maybe a sherry might be nice.
Yes, that would be good. Yeah.
But lovely to see you, and I will see you soon at Decanter as well.
Oh yes, of course I will. Well, yes, Ronan, it's it's going to be fascinating doing it isolated, but also distant. But I think it's going to be great. We really going to taste some fab wines.
Well, I'm very honoured to be asked to step in for Michael Hill-Smith. I think it's because I have a bald head and wear a black T-shirt. I think.
Well, you just need to put on an Australian accent, and you'll be there.
All right, Sarah. Congratulations again, and you need to go and see your new grandchild. So we'll say goodnight.
Okay. All right. See you all again after the summer.